I grew up in a town with one rule. It was a rule that everyone followed, but no one would ever explain why. Never look at the man in the hat. Every night at exactly midnight, he walks down Main Street. Always from the old post office to the abandoned train station. Same path, same pace, every single night. No one knows where he came from, and no one knows why he's here. All we know is this: if you see him, keep walking. Don't stop, don't look, and don't acknowledge him in any way. Because the moment you do, well, we don't really know what happens, because everyone who's broken the rule has disappeared. Our town sits in a valley, surrounded by these hills that tend to trap the fog that rolls in most evenings. The streets get unusually quiet after dark. Not just empty, but silent, like the town itself is holding its breath. Our town is a decent size, but still small enough that everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows the rule. But it's not like this was something that was taught to us in school. There were no official warnings or no signs posted around the town. It was knowledge that seemed to seep into your consciousness, like how you know not to touch a hot stove or walk into traffic. Never look at the man in the hat. There are whispers and rumors about when he first appeared. Some say it was after the old train station closed in the 50s, while others claim he's been walking this path since before the town was founded. My grandfather once let it slip that there were others before him, but then he shut down and got defensive when I asked what he meant. Even my parents never discussed it with us directly. They would just be sure to remind us that if we ever went out, to make sure that we were home before dark. And even though there were no breaking news alerts or taped off crime scenes like you see on TV, we always knew when someone had broken the rule because my mom would basically turn into a prison warden, and we would only be allowed to go to school and back unless she was with us. But that's it. They were never covered on the local news, or even made the local paper. When I was 10, the miller's son, David, came to school one day and told us all that he had seen him, that he had looked at the man in the hat. We were all just enamored, crowding around his desk at recess. What did he look like? What happened? We all wanted to know. But as soon as the teacher caught wind of it, she shut the conversation down so fast it gave us whiplash. Her face had gone pale, and she sent David to the principal's office. The next day I saw David, he cornered me by the lockers. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around like he was watching something move that I couldn't see.
"He doesn't have a face,"
David whispered, his voice cracking.
"but he can still see you. He's looking at me right now."
I glanced around the empty hallway, feeling a chill despite it being so warm that day. "David, there's nobody here." We all, of course, thought he was lying. No one has ever lived to tell anyone what has happened after they've seen the man in the hat. But over the next few days, David didn't look good. He looked like he hadn't slept. And it was the same the next day. He looked like a zombie. He was paranoid and kept distracting the class, thinking he was seeing things out of the window or in the corner of the room. That was the last day he came to school. After that, the Millers were gone. Their house was empty, not vacant like someone had moved out, empty like they had just vanished. The framed photos still hung on the walls, dinner plates were left on the table, and the car was still in the driveway. But the Millers? They were gone. Everyone knew why, even though no one would say it out loud. David really had looked at the man in the hat. When I was 14, Miss Winters, our English teacher, she had assigned us to write about local folklore. Tommy Blake tried to write about the man in the hat. The next day, Miss Winters announced a change in curriculum. Tommy's parents pulled him out of school for a week, and when he came back, he wouldn't talk about it. His essay topic had mysteriously changed to migration patterns of local birds. I think there was always this rebellious part of me that wanted to believe it was just small-town superstition, a boogeyman the adults invented to keep us kids in line. But the fear was real. You could see it in the way people walked a little bit faster past the empty intersections when it got dark, or how store clerks would glance at the clock nervously as closing time approached, and how the streetlights flickered just a little too often on that same block of Main Street. Even if nobody actually believed in him, everybody thought about him. I remember as I got older, I wanted to go to a late movie with my friends. My mom and my grandma were sitting in the living room when my grandma shot up off the sofa and started lecturing me on being out at night.
If you ever hear footsteps behind you at night, keep walking. Never ever stop.
My mother nervously dismissed her, told her she was just trying to scare me with her old folk tales. But those words stuck with me, burned in the back of my mind, until the night I broke the rule, and I looked at the man in the hat. I never meant to be out late. I'm an adult now. I've lived in this town my whole life, followed the rule, and kept my head down. I work at the library, quiet and predictable. Every weekday I'm home by 6, and weekends I might stay out until 9 or 10 with friends, but always home before the streets are empty. But that Friday was different. My college roommate was visiting from out of town. We lost track of time at the Rusty Nail, catching up over beers. When I checked my watch, it was 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes. That's all the time I had to get home, a 20-minute walk. I told her I needed to go, nearly knocking over my chair as I got up. She laughed, confused. "What's the rush? One more drink?" She wasn't from here. She didn't know. "I can't," I told her as I was pulling on my jacket. I need to get home." Her smile faltered. "You're acting weird. Is everything okay?" How could I explain that our town lives in fear of a shadow that walks at midnight? That we organize our entire lives around avoiding this thing that might not even exist? "It's complicated," was all I said. "Town things." As I walked out the door, I was hoping to see more people out, but the streets were empty. Everyone who lived here knew better than to be out now. The fog had rolled in thick that night, wrapping around the street lamps like ghostly fingers. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. I started out walking fast, and before I knew it, I was jogging. My apartment was on Oak Street. It's a good 15 blocks away. Just as I reached the corner of Main and Elm, the town clock chimed. I froze. It was midnight, and I was standing right in the middle of his path. I should have run, or crossed the street, or ducked into an alley, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, like my feet had suddenly taken root into the concrete. The air grew colder so I could see my breath. The street lamp started to dim, as if shrinking away from what was coming. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the hurried footsteps of someone trying to get home. These were measured, deliberate. The sound of hard-soled shoes on pavement, walking with mechanical precision. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind.
If you ever hear footsteps behind you at night, keep walking. Never ever stop.
But I had stopped, and now he was coming. I forced myself to move, continuing down Main Street, my shoulders hunched. Just get home, I thought. Don't turn around. The footsteps continued behind me, not speeding up, but not slowing down. Always the same distance apart, and always the same distance behind me. As I passed under the streetlights, they flickered. One by one, they dimmed and then brightened, like they were taking labored breaths. I was still trying to convince myself I was imagining it, that the stories were just getting to me, or that I'd had too much to drink. It was probably just another person from the bar realizing what time it was and trying to get home quickly too. But then, as I passed by the old barber shop on Main, its large storefront window caught my reflection as I walked by. And his. A tall, thin figure in a wide-brimmed hat. His form was darker than the darkness around him, like he was somehow pulling the shadows towards him. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette of the hat, a long coat, and emptiness where his face should be. My heart stopped. He was real. I almost started freaking out, but I needed to keep my cool. I bit my lips so hard I tasted the blood, forcing myself not to react, not to turn, not to acknowledge him. Just keep walking. 3 more blocks to my apartment. 3 more blocks and I'd be safe. But then the footsteps stopped, and so did I. Almost automatically, like my body was no longer under my control. And I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity, a lifetime of wondering if he was really real and what he really looked like. Maybe it was defiance, tired of living in fear of something I'd never seen. Or maybe it was just the simple human instinct, the need to face what's hunting you. But for whatever reason, I turned around, and there he was, standing beneath a street lamp. Though the light seemed unable to touch him, his figure was too tall and his posture too still. The wide brim of his hat cast a shadow where his face should be. And even though the light was directly above him, he still looked like a shadow. And for one terrible moment, nothing happened. And then he took a single step towards me. No, not a step. More like the space between us just simply shortened. And just like that, in an instant, he was right in front of me. The street lamp above us flickered once, twice, and then went out. The sudden plunge into darkness snapped me back into reality. My body finally remembered how to move, and I stumbled backwards and fell on my ass. I tried not to, but again I looked. I looked up at his face and tried to reassure myself that this guy, this man, was human. And as I stared up at him, he tilted his head just slightly, and though I still couldn't see his face, I knew he was smiling. I could feel it, like something was stretching or twisting in the void beneath that shadowed hat. I shot up off the ground and started running for my home, running for my life. I slammed my apartment door behind me, locked it, chained it, dragged a chair in front of it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I turned on every light, checked every window, and closed every blind. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I'd escaped. And slowly, I approached the front window that looked out over the street in front of the building, pulling the curtain back just slightly. He was there, standing motionless on the sidewalk in front of my building. The same dark silhouette, the same wide-brimmed hat, his face still hidden in a shadow. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, looking up at my window, looking at me. I dropped the curtain and backed away until I hit the opposite wall. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I gathered the courage to peek outside, he was still there. And the next night too, and the next. And by the fourth day, I started doubting my own sanity. I called in sick to work and stopped answering my texts. I sat in my living room with the blinds drawn, jumping at every creak and shadow. He's not real, I whispered to myself over and over. He can't be real. But each night when I checked, there he stood, patient, waiting, as if it meant nothing to him. I started wondering if I was already gone, if my disappearance had already happened, and I just didn't know it yet. It didn't matter if I left my apartment or took a different route home. No matter where I went, he was always there, standing at the entrance to my building, standing across the street when I left work, silhouetted against the glow of a street lamp when I went to the store. He never got any closer, but he never moved farther away. He was always watching. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. But on the seventh night, when I looked out the window to check, he was gone. For the first time in a week, the sidewalk was empty. He wasn't there. I should have felt relieved, but instead, an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. I heard the familiar sound of my bathroom door in the hallway slowly opening. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. I took a step towards the bathroom. My pulse was hammering in my ears. It was too dark. The hallway light, which I had kept on all week, was off now. The apartment felt different. The air was thick, it was suffocating. Every instinct in my body screamed to run. But where was I going to go? There was nowhere to go. I took a slow, shaking step forward, my eyes straining to adjust to the darkness of the hallway. I reached for the light switch, but when my fingers found it, it wouldn't work. I turned my head slightly, my breath coming out in shallow gasps. The light in my living room was off now too. But when I turned back, I saw him, standing in the bathroom doorway at the end of the hall. The man in the hat was inside my home. He didn't move, but somehow I knew he was smiling. The shadows beneath his hat stretched and shifted like ink swirling in water. And then he took a step forward. I stepped back until my spine hit the wall. I had nowhere to go. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why me?" He took another step. The darkness around him seemed to pulse, to breathe. I tried to scream, but my throat locked tight. My body refused to obey. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, smooth, almost normal.
"You've seen me. Now no one will see you."
The lights flickered back on, and he was gone. At first I thought it was over. I had just collapsed on the floor, relief washing over me. And then my phone rang. It was my mother. I had missed our weekly dinner. "Hello," I answered, my voice still shaking. But she just kept talking, as if she couldn't hear me. "Hello, are you there? Hello?" I shouted into the phone, nothing. She hung up and called back, left a voicemail saying she was worried. An hour later, she came to my door with my landlord. I stood right in front of them, screaming, waving my arms. They walked right through me.
The car is still here,
My mother said, looking around my apartment.
The TV's still on? They couldn't have just disappeared.
But I had. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm still here in my apartment. I can't leave. I've tried, and something pulls me back every time I reach the front door, like an invisible tether. I watched my mom put up missing person posters with my face on them on the lampposts in front of my apartment, but others from town would just come right behind her and take them down. They all knew what happened, and they weren't going to talk about it. No one was going to talk about it, except my mom, but eventually she gave up. Last week I watched my best friend sort through my belongings. She picked up the photo of us from graduation and traced her finger over my face and broke down crying. I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders, but she couldn't feel it, speaking words that she couldn't hear. The worst part isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by the people you love and they can't see you, watching life continue without you, seeing how quickly the world adapts to you being gone. Yesterday they packed my things. My mother cried the whole time. And tomorrow, someone new will move in, and I'll be here, watching them live their life, unable to speak to them, and unable to warn them. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of others like me, a flicker in the corner of my eye or a shadow that doesn't quite match the light, a cold spot in the otherwise warm room. I wonder if they're all here, everyone who's ever broken the rule. Invisible crowds walking through the streets alongside the living, all of us watching, but none of us seen, all of us collected by the man in the hat. So I'm recording this. Not that anyone will ever see it, not that anyone will ever hear it, but at least I've told my story, and at least someone might understand what actually happens when you look at the man in the hat. You don't die, but you do vanish. You become a ghost in your own life forever. Sometimes at night, I see him walking past my window, that familiar silhouette, and I know that son of a bitch sees me watching, because he always tips his hat, just slightly, just enough to acknowledge another soul that he's collected. So if you ever find yourself in my town, remember the rule. Never look at the man in the hat, or you'll end up like me, telling your story to an empty room. Forever.